What's up, everybody? This is Josh Lyles, founder over at Sales-CRM. Today, I've got with me a pretty solid guest. I think this is going to be an awesome episode. I'm pretty excited about it. But I've got Logan Dyer. Logan is the managing partner and co-founder over at Blackbox Logistics in Birmingham. I've had the pleasure to go visit them in Birmingham. They just had a recent pretty big office opening with a beautiful office in downtown Birmingham and Magic City. So they've got a pretty awesome story. They've grown their brokerage, scaled it up pretty fast, and they've got some big things on the way. So I felt that Logan was going to be a good guest to talk to, kind of all things sales in this episode. So I'm excited to have him with us. But Logan, good to see you, man.
You too, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm pumped. I'm kind of the new to the content stuff. I don't do many podcasts and streams, so I'm pumped.
Grateful to have you. With not doing them too many times. I'm sure this is going to be one of many that you do going forward. So
if I don't embarrass myself, then yeah, hopefully so.
No, not at all. Well, cool, man. Tell us a little bit about Blackbox, kind of the situation that you guys are in today, but maybe even just like a quick background of how you even got to the point of, co-founding Blackbox.
Yeah, for sure. So I started working in freight in 2016 in a little agency shop in Birmingham, and was actually working with my two now partners, and we were also roommates. So we learned the ropes, learned a lot about what to do, learned a lot about what not to do through trial and error. And, we're all getting together with one another every night when we went home and kind of put a plan together and said this might be worth exploring on our own. We felt like we each contributed pieces that others were missing, and kind of made, a whole singular solution between the three of us, which has always been nice. So in 2019, I like to tell it, I resigned from the company, and my two now partners were actually fired, because the first question was, are you resigning alone? And it was, well, no, not exactly. So I resigned, they were fired. And then we started brokering out of the back room of the house that we were living in, or we started dispatching actually, because we were waiting out some contracts, and started brokering after those contracts had expired. So we started brokering in the back room of the house in early 2020, and all of a sudden looked at the news and saw COVID, wondered if it would ever come over. It was kind of a scary situation, but actually wound up being, we were super fortunate for the timing that we had. So hired two people to kind of help us immediately, trained one of them on sales. All of a sudden we had one additional person and no room in the back room of the house. We moved to a little 5,500 square foot office, probably 10 minutes from where we were living. Kept hiring. All of a sudden we had 12 people in there. Fire marshal didn't like that too much, so we moved into another office into some old hospital professional buildings in Birmingham. Started hiring larger numbers at a time. Started hiring 8 to 10 reps in a group. Eventually filled out that space, and then in September we just relocated to downtown Birmingham. We've got about 15,000 square feet, and I think we've got, between in-office and remote/offshore, we've got about 50 folks with us now.
50 guys right now, or 50 team members. Yep. And you got two other co-founders, right? Both Wills?
Yep, Will Hopkins and William Graves, who are awesome, and we stay pretty grateful for one another, because again, nothing's changed with each of us contributes a piece that the others may not, and it winds up working out pretty well.
So I guess from you and I always like asking this to co-founders, but I guess for you in particular, and kind of the main hat that you wear, right? I'm sure that you, Will, and William kind of all do a little bit of everything, but I'm sure you guys also probably delegate certain things.
For sure.
Somebody may do sales, somebody may do ops, somebody may do more of like numbers, financial stuff. What's kind of the primary hat or hats that you wear?
Yeah, mine is sales, training, and broker development. Primarily the training. So one thing that we heard all the time from other brokers is, hey, we're not getting trained. And we've worked at a brokerage before. We know people who have worked at other brokerages before. This isn't specific to where we may have worked before, but you always hear about it. Hey, I got given a white pages. I had to set up my computer. I was told to make calls, and what you see is 10% are very successful, 90% are not, but out of that 90%, I think about 50% of those are successful if they're given the right resources, the right training, and the right understanding, because it's a very vague industry, right? So taking the
Hmm.
time to actually put the training down on paper, run through examples, uh, and really just ingrain what we're doing here is so absolutely invaluable. So I kind of took that on. I took up the training. I worked a book of business for a long time. I still kind of do, and then the sales training, sales management.
Interesting. So I want to get into training, but I want to talk about a step before training, which is hiring. Did
Sure.
you, so before, you started mentioning like, hey, we filling out the space, fire marshals getting on us and all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
I guess before Blackbox and with what you were doing, had you hired people before?
No. Oh no. No. Yeah, no, I was not somebody that anybody would ever put in charge of hiring people. I was surprised that I got hired in the first place. I didn't really want to take anything seriously, but I did, and it was great. But yeah, hiring is tough, and we're at a point now, and it's actually a good question, because we're at that 50 mark, and a lot of founders who have scaled brokerages to the 500,000 employee, looking towards kind of the high 100 million to maybe even $1 billion in revenue. I,
Hmm.
I hear some interviews, and it's like, well, what was the hardest part? And it was like right at that 50 mark, because there's so many new, regulations that come in when you're no longer a small business. But what we're running into, to circle back into your question, is, man, it wasn't super difficult to hire at first because it was all word of mouth. I mean,
Hmm.
Will Hopkins, one of my partners, is from Birmingham. He grew up here. He's a good guy. He's likable, so he had a lot of friends, and that was a huge resource for us at first, because you know, there's a couple high schools in town. We might as well be a feeder program for them. But after you get to that point, and after the newness of it kind of wears off, you're having to go reach out. You're having to do the recruiting. You're having to put stuff out there on platforms that you're not used to. So that's definitely been interesting. And no, I have not had any experience hiring before.
Gotcha. So not, I'm sure now you're probably a better hiring manager, right? But I think what I'm kind of curious about is if you're investing so much into training, obviously it is a time and resources commitment that you're making to people coming into your organization, right? Trying to make the most of it. And so to me, that's where I think hiring is super important, because obviously like you want to make sure you're hiring the right people. And I feel like I have seen some stuff from being on the sales dash side where people just basically bring in anybody and everybody. So I guess from like from what you've learned sort of in your, tenure now of being a hiring manager, what are some of the main things that you're looking for more so in the salespeople that you're trying to hire? And who also maybe just doesn't make a good fit when you're hiring somebody to be a salesperson.
Yeah, so I'm actually notorious in the company, and I've actually stopped predicting like success off of individuals, but because everybody has those hires. I got a good feeling about that person. Jury's out on this hire, just based on that training, right? You get so much insight as to a person's attentiveness or anything like that. But
Hmm.
but when it comes to the actual hiring, it's tough, especially in a space like freight, right? Uh, because it is the risk that you take. Because if you want an A player in freight, it's expensive, and A players in freight are taken care of. A players in freight don't want to go anywhere, because companies that have A players keep the A players. So we've kind of gone with the model of, let's get them in and develop them. And I think we buy ourselves a little bit of room to do that, since I'm confident saying we are putting more resources into training than any other brokerage our size in the country. I'm almost positive about that. So we kind of buy ourselves a little bit of flexibility on criteria. Now, somebody's going to be an ace. What do we look for in interviews? We'll challenge them on things. We'll challenge them on stories they're telling. We'll challenge them on experiences that they've had. We'll disagree with them. We'll see how they handle that objection. And then we'll ask them standard interview questions, but more than that, it's can you hold a conversation with me? Can you handle this objection that I'm giving you? Are you going to turn red in the face when I tell you that you're wrong about something? Or are you going to be able to logically explain to me? Because I don't care if you weren't captain of the varsity football team, but I want to hear if you were good at football or not, right? And I want to know why
Hmm.
you didn't start or whatever. But we're doing that in interviews, and our interview process is more informal. But we like to see people able to handle objections. We like to see people being able to hold a conversation. And then, to be honest with you, one of the biggest things is, can you work a computer? Because it's not like a huge, we're going to, and
Yeah.
not like can you create pivot charts and like run R scripts? It's like, can you send an email? Because we get so many people that have come in and are, have to be trained on that. And we're
Hmm.
providing training on the substance and would prefer not to provide training on the cosmetics. If you can come with those out of the box, we can teach you about freight. It's, can you have a conversation? Can you handle objections? And pretty much, can you dial a phone? And past that, we're going to give you the resources that you need to succeed.
That's interesting. I'm actually, that's funny you brought that up about the tech savviness, because I've always kind of wondered that with some people. In a past life, the hiring person will come in one time and they just couldn't type.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a challenge, because obviously you live in front of the screens, and typing is so important. And obviously, the faster you type, the more efficient that you can be, and it can help you out within your day. But no, that's interesting too, here to just like the stories and people telling the truth in their stories. Because I think
Sure.
what's so tough about the hiring process, especially when it comes to salespeople, they're trying to sell themselves, but
Sure.
often, I mean, they're not going to really give you the negatives. And I think that's what's always really important, is can you actually get them to start telling you the truth? Because it's
Sure.
okay to say, hey, I didn't start on the football team, but shoot, I want to know, like, in that situation, well, what did you do to try to get to that spot, right? You probably had
Right.
to work harder because maybe you're not the most talented person. So
Right.
yeah, I've always found that stuff very interesting, but impactful at an organization.
For sure. And people interview so well, man. People interview so well
Oh
and
yeah,
commit to a start day and sign a job offer and just don't show up. I mean, it
it's
happens.
crazy.
It's tough. And we're brokerage, man. Our most of the compensation here is off of commission, and a lot of the individuals that we are interviewing have just graduated college or haven't gone to college and are tired of working outside in Alabama in August, and I don't blame them at all.
Hmm.
Um, so, sometimes the roughest around the edges are the ones that we want the most. It's the people who need it, or the people who are going to get it. And wearing a coat and tie into the interview is not something that's going to impress me off the jump. And that's unconventional, right? I understand
Yeah,
that if I were EY, or if I were, a Fortune 500 company, yeah, you come in, if we're on Wall Street, you're going to come in a coat, but I don't want you to
suited.
do that. Yeah, it's not going to impress me. I want to know, can you have a conversation, and are you driven to do this for you?
Good stuff. So transitioning to training, because to
Sure.
touch on this really quick, I think it's really impressive, and also just unique to hear in comparison to a lot of others, because most people don't put a lot of emphasis on training. And the reason why I think it's interesting is because I'm a big believer that you can look at the people that are at the top of the space or in any domain and look at what they've done and try to figure out, well, what makes them great. And I know that they don't have a great reputation, but when I ask people about TQL, because I have customers and these guys went on to found their own companies within brokerage, they come from TQL. And
Yep.
I'll ask them, like, what made TQL so great? And every single time the answer has been their training. And
Mm-hmm.
I've heard this from multiple people, even on the outside, that have just worked with people within there. So what is that? I mean, I guess, like, for you in particular, like, what was the, like, moment, turning point where you're like, hey, training's got to be the main thing that we focus on. Like, sure, if we're going to be a brokerage of 30, 50 people, now being at 50, this is going to be the main thing that you're spending your time on, as a co-founder.
Sure.
Why do you find it, training in particular, so important?
So I'm going to answer that in a second. Something else about TQL is it's all based off of a process system called total quality management, from what I understand. And that's like a Six Sigma sort of thing. So yes, the training on the front end, but also the processes and procedures on the back end are what make that run like such a scalable, well-oiled machine.
Mm.
And yeah, anybody have your opinion about TQL, but if you want to sit here and tell me for some reason they're not successful, then I'm going to consider that white noise, because if it's very, very, very impressive what they've done. The moment that it happened gradually, I think it was a culmination of every one of the 500 times that I heard, I tried logistics, I didn't get trained, and it didn't work. And these are people who I'm speaking with who I either know personally or I just met, and I can envision, hey, if I can move truckloads and I can onboard shippers, there is absolutely no reason that you can't. So it's seeing all of this potential and these high turnovers, and it's saying, well, this person shouldn't have turned over. They weren't offered the resources they needed to be offered. So what else is expected? But what you're doing is you're wasting potential, and it's an expensive waste too. You're gonna pay for 6 or 9 months for somebody to get started. You're gonna pay them a salary, benefits kick in after 90. That's expensive. Do the work on the front end, and and just have them ready. So I have been working on our sales playbook all week, because we have a new group starting Monday. I mean, after every single training group, we relook at our training manual, and we put in stuff that we missed, and we put in videos, and we put in pictures, and we put in quizzes, and we put in all of this. So for the first 30 days that people are here, you've been into the office, you may have seen the training area. I mean, it's like a classroom with 10
Yeah,
desks
it's a
in it,
classroom.
and a whiteboard up front. And I'm overloading these individuals with information. And yes, sometimes it can be a fault. But what we want to do here is give them as much knowledge as we can possibly give them up front. And then as soon as the phone rings on their first call, tell them to forget it. Because what happens is individuals start doing math in their head when they're on a
Mm-hmm.
sales call. And if you're doing math in your head, you're going to lose.
Can't. That's okay.
Right?
We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. Um, what topics for what you're willing to share? But I mean, obviously, you're going through classes, right, and multiple days,
Mm-hmm.
weeks. What are the just general topics that you're training on?
Sure. So first is, what is a broker? What's the brokerage space? Who are the parties involved in these transactions, right? What's a shipper? What's a lumper company? What's the difference between a shipper and a customer? When is your customer not the shipper, right? What are BOLs? How does possession and liability transfer from party to party when a BOL is signed and exchanged, right? Very brief overview of the Carmack Amendment. Who is the FMCSA? Who is the DOT? Which one's federal? Which one's state? Then we're going to go over equipment types. Then we'll do accessorials. And then we'll run into markets. We'll talk about supply and demand. We'll talk about production and consumption markets. We're not going to go through and say Houston's a production market, but Bismarck, North Dakota is a consumption market. But we're going to say, hey, let's simplify this as much as possible. If there is a high demand and a low supply for trucks, what do we think causes that? Where do you see that's evident in the United States? All right, there's your production markets, right? So we're explaining the markets,
Oh wow.
and then we're going to go over paperwork. We're going to go over, you hear I need a BOL. What's a BOL? You hear, hey, we need to upload your COI. What is a COI? And then we go over our software. We go over pretty much everything, but I mean, we give the full landscape, and we'll drill down where necessary. And then we switch over to sales. So that first part takes 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, and then sales takes about a week as well.
Okay. So let's just say I get through 3.5 weeks, and I'm ready to hit the floor. One question I'm curious about: how would you help me? Let's just say I'm fresh out of UAB.
Mm-hmm.
Just went through your class.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about me picking a niche? Or do
So
you even have me pick a niche?
yeah, so our ICP in general is small to medium sized to mid-market companies. We are nationwide, we're not location specific, and we are primarily raw material open deck transportation.
Okay.
we also move a ton of vans, right? It's hard because if I'm looking at somebody and picking a niche, and that's one of the biggest parts of our sales training is what's a good commodity? Who are you calling? Because there's got to be a word before manufacturer if you're doing a
Hmm.
Google search, right? So like, what's a good commodity? We visualize that, and then throughout the entire training, we'll have a pop quiz every 3 or 4 days where we just go round robin, and I'm gonna list, hey, drive in, or hey, reefer. You got 3 seconds to name a commodity, right? If you can't name one in 3 seconds, or you repeat one, you're out, right? If you win, you get a piece of candy, great, whatever.
Yeah.
But that gives them an idea of what commodities are going where, and then at the end of it, we'll kind of talk to them and say, hey, what sounds good to you, what doesn't, and then let them run through prospecting, and we have them manually build a leads list with 500 leads. It takes about 2 days. What we do with that, ultimately, those are used for their first week or two of calling, when they're getting the shakes out, because those are coming off of Hoovers or industrial quick search or whatever, so they're
Right.
ridiculously saturated. And then we let them call and get their shakes out on the phone doing that to these shippers that are getting hammered by brokers, and then we take over a lot of the responsibility for pipeline strategization, excuse me. And we'll maintain transparency on that. Hey, spring's around the corner, or it's November now. I'm kicking a bunch of SMB food and bev leads in because your sales cycle should line up with go time for them in the spring.
Got it. So one thing I wanted to ask about, because I don't think that this gets talked enough about, whether it's expectation setting, sales in general, but to me, mindset, I think, is just crucial to talk about for sales success, let alone in brokerage, right? Because shipper sales is a ton of rejection when you're making those cold calls, especially, to the DMB list, whatever it may be.
For sure.
How do you prepare a new rep to face that rejection?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's there's a lot that goes into it. I wouldn't say there's necessarily one concrete answer for that. So we try to equip them as best as possible with a balance of, hey, you have to find a balance between, hey, you're emotionally invested in this, on the wins and the work and the ethic, but when it comes to the rejection, you must remember that this is transactional, right? That person doesn't hate you. They hate the fact that you're the sixth person calling them today with the same pitch. At the same time, we stress a ton of responsibility, because yes, that person told you to kick rocks. What could you have done different to win them over? Was your read on the room terrible? Did you sound too formal? Because if you did, I wouldn't want to talk to you either, right? Now, sometimes it's just a loss, but we like to convey a balance between, you need to be as emotionally invested in this as you can on the positives that you can take from it. And when you get rejected, you just need to understand that this is business to business sales and it is transactional. And you become callous to it, right?
You do.
I mean, and actually it's pretty funny. We one of our assistant GM, his name is Skylar. He does this thing where, obviously, when reps get the real winners on the phone and they're F off and F this and F you and F that, we send them in Slack and he remixes them over dubstep songs, and it's actually awesome, right? So we there is, and I
You
think
got to laugh about
that's,
it a little bit.
you have to, right?
Yeah.
And it's also, I think, something that's been very helpful for us is, if somebody gets down in the dumps and they come to me, I'll just play them the last one that I got too, but
Solid.
yeah, but it's hard, but it is hard to gauge people to handle that rejection, especially the college kids, especially the guys coming out of school who have just worked really hard for a degree and they're ready to go take on the world. And it's logistics, man. It's not what people expect when they come in. It's not how people expect to for the professional world to go. People cuss, people yell, people scream, people are mean. But yeah, on that individual call level, like the screaming and yelling and the rejection, it's we have to empathize with it, right? And we also have to remember that it's transactional.
For sure. I think I know what the answer is to this one, but just in regards to the different sales channels that are out there, right? You've got cold calls, you've got cold emails, you've got on-site visits that you guys can go make and, bring in donuts and stuff. You've got handwritten notes. What is your number one sales channel that you're always focused on?
Calls, 100%. Calls. And we have some guys in here who have had some really, really, really good success with email campaigns. And I mean, super unconventional email campaigns. I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at you, Jeff Roper. And they've had a ton of success. But there comes a time where calls are the most uncomfortable for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Calls are the most uncomfortable because it is two individuals who are vulnerable at their most vulnerable. If I go in to visit an in-person, we've knocked on doors, we've climbed the fences, we've climbed up on the loading docks, I've gotten kicked out of an Amazon warehouse. There's only a level of meanness that somebody will express to you in person. People will say all sorts of stuff on the phone,
Oh,
right?
of course. Yeah.
And I think that just goes to show that people are the most vulnerable because the limit of what somebody is willing to say will not exist. So when we are calling out to shippers, we know that, so we're super apprehensive to call sometimes. And I think there's something to be said about the fact that a lot of individuals get mundane and will be doing anything except for calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think I think when you have built the calluses and when you've kind of gone through the repetitions enough, it's actually, I've always found kind of okay from my sales experience for there to be a little bit of a, kind of tipping point where somebody's getting frustrated because if you're then able to kind of bring them back down, you sort of been through this experience with them. And now you've kind of got a little bit of a bond, right, where they can at least have empathize a little bit because of how you're coming across or what you're actually trying to do. And shoot, maybe you're just like, hey, look, I'm just trying to help, right? Like I'm constantly shipping this specific product on hot shots and whatever it may be, right? And then eventually they say, okay, cool, well, how about you quote this one for me? And then you're like, well, what in the hell just happened?
For sure.
Right. And
For sure.
I just think if you can just kind of get through that initial thing, let them know that you're not rattled, but hey, like you're calling for a specific reason. You're confident. You saw that this product was on the website. You're confident that, I shipped this for X customer and Y customer. I know that this is the common stuff that can happen. That's the reason why I was giving you a shout. And I think if you can maintain that, I think it's great because then you can bring them down really quick and it flips the whole thing, right? Of actually going through. And this is one thing that especially at my last brokerage. So at first, when I was there, I oversaw the ops team, and they were a team of 16. And then eventually I went to oversee the sales team, which was a team of 8. And a lot of the times, of course, you want the first shipment to just go perfect, right?
Sure.
Because you're trying to prove your service and stuff. A lot of the times, as wild as this sounds, sometimes when the first shipments did not go well, but we're displaying all the communication, the problem solving, getting on the phone with them, all of a sudden now you got this crazy bond with that person.
Sure.
Wasn't the most ideal experience from the first load, but I've always found that to be pretty unique. Have you guys experienced some of that too?
Yeah, I mean, they're watching you operate with a sense of urgency. They're watching you operate under less than ideal circumstances. They're watching you solve your problem, and they are gauging and following how little involvement they're having to have while you're solving the problem for them, and that's huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you were saying, that tipping point, right? You've got these customers and they get so frustrated, and you say, hey, look, I've got some value to offer you, right? I've been persistent with you, but I've managed not to have you block my number yet. What's the holdup? Because you're still picking up the phone when I call, right? And what we train, one of the biggest things that we train here is those are the best customers. the no customers are the best customers. If you get a load list or you get bids on day one, because we're mostly SMBs, so that does
Yeah.
happen, right? It's different than if you spend 7 months doing an RFP cycle and you finally get a Q1, great, whatever. But the SMBs in the mid markets that say, no, we're set, no, we're set, no, I told you 4 times that we're set, those are the absolute best customers, point blank, period. Here's why. They are, every other transportation provider that is calling them is getting told no, and then they might follow up again, and then they're going to go back and hide in their cave, right? If you follow up, you're going to beat the other 8 guys because they're all going to have walked away before the 12th follow-up. And what's
Correct.
happening behind the walls, right? When the timing lines up and they've got something hot on Friday and their current guy's out of the office, you've seen it a million times, I've seen it a million times. What happens, that transaction of that paperwork, that onboarding, that accounting, that, exchange of insurance and listing on a COI, that is just the golden ticket, because what you've accomplished now is you are now being protected against competition to the same level that they were protecting their current broker. There's no market saturation. They're not bidding you against each other. They're giving you one, him one, you one, her one, you one, him one. And the margins are going to increase. You're going to be able to develop the relationship. They're not bidding out against you. It is the no customers that are the ones that make you successful in this. It's not the yeses. It's not I'm bidding next to a baker's dozen brokers for $125 margin for 6 hours a day.
Yeah, I think it's just a simple rule. If it's that easy for anybody to get in with a very generic cold call to get on a quote list, a load list on the first call, then it's going to be the same way for others. But if it takes you 12 follow-ups, hey, you should have a lot more faith in the security of that account, because most people are not going to get to the 12 follow-up range.
For
Majority fall
sure.
off after probably 2, if I'm being real.
Absolutely.
So going back to the cold calls, do you believe in call scripts?
No. God, no.
Why?
No. I've never taken a call from anybody reading from a script that I felt like I wanted to listen to, or, I mean, call sales is about business value and personal connection, and you're going to blow the personal connection before you get to your third sentence about what business value you want to offer me.
How important would you say tone is when you're on the phone as a sales rep?
It's everything. And it's a game of opposites. It's
What do you mean by that?
the guys coming out of college who have, and I think I actually said this on Will's podcast the other day. When we train sales, it is a lot about momentum and power dynamic within a call, because a call is like a dance, right? It takes momentum. You have to play 2 steps ahead. You have to pose questions that are going to warrant responses that are going to compound your momentum in the call. I was raised, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, please and thank you will get you farther than anything you learned in middle school. I believe that. I do. When I was a kid, after baseball or whatever, when I would go back to my house and I wanted a friend to spend the night, I would say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, can little Joey come over on Friday night so we can go to the movie? People retain that through college. Hey, professor, how are you doing today? Right? You see it in emails all the time, right? Hey, I was
Dear
wondering,
Logan.
Dear Logan, hey, I was wondering if I could maybe make up this test today. Well, what happens, and I don't think people realize, is that in the business to business world, they don't see who you are on the other end of the phone. It is even playing ground from the second that call is connected, and their assumption is totally dependent on what they're hearing. So if I call in and I say, hey, this is Logan over at Blackbox, how are you? If we look at the power dynamic of what that does to a business transaction, this is me, this is the prospect. I'm immediately utilizing a tone that implies that I am below them and that I'm speaking up to them. There is absolutely no reason why they are going to treat me like anything other than a child who is asking them to have a sleepover with their friend after baseball, right? And it's a game of opposites, again, because we're all raised, hey, raise your pitch a little bit, be very polite. But what happens is you hit the real world and you hit business to business sales, and that flies out the window, because Craig in shipping isn't expecting a call from an infant. Craig in shipping is expecting a call from a man or woman who he needs to trust is going to handle his shipments to the best of their ability and give him as few headaches as possible. And when I call in and I sound like I'm sucking up, it immediately negates my stance in the dynamic.
So what specifically are you coaching in that? Is it just lower inflection, lower tone, slow down?
Yeah, so it's case by case, right? We go through and we listen. Hey, what do these people sound like on the phone? Sometimes I rarely have to tell individuals to be more formal. 99% of the time, I have to say, hey, bring that down a ton. You don't sound like somebody who an individual would want to work with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that starts from the jump. That starts with introducing yourself. So we go over individual calls, and it's, hey, kick down the formality a little bit, kick down the verbiage, the fluidity and the pace. But yeah, I mean, we'll go through one by one and play them out, and we'll draw on the board. Hey, here's where your momentum's going. If it goes up, here's why. If your momentum's going down, here's why. But yeah, 99% it's hey, you need to be more informal and converse with this individual like a human being because they think you're reading off of a script.
It's impressive stuff, man. You're not typically hearing this from people within training programs, and I think it's just more so like, hey, here's a list of people to call, go call them. But
Sure.
this is the next level stuff, and I don't know, man. Kudos to you guys, because that's the stuff that I would say. Like, I always like to use the phrase "making the phone lighter to pick up,"
Sure.
right? Because there's those salespeople that phone can feel heavy and they don't want to dial. But
For
I
sure.
think that kind of training is what makes it a lot easier, because I will also say tone for me on sales calls, of like the way that you and I are talking to each other right now, would be the same thing that if it was a cold call, if it's a voicemail, if it's a demo, it's all the same, right? Because
For
people
sure.
can kind of smell the inauthenticity, or if you're really just showing up as you. And I always think that piece is interesting.
Sure. And back to the whole concept of it's a game of opposites, man. We see folks, and it's such a hard habit to break, that informality, because we are trained on it our entire lives by our parents, by our teachers, by society in general.
Mm-hmm.
And we see reps struggle for 90 days, 4 months, and we're in their ear the whole time. Hey, you need to tone this formality down. You need to lower your pitch. You need to sound maybe more enthusiastic, but a little more relaxed. And then what happens is eventually we'll pull them aside, and it's great seeing the reps get really frustrated to the point where they're willing to change something, because that's where we can invoke a ton of growth, because they're like, I am so frustrated, I will do whatever. And the answer is try less hard and you will get better results. And it's crazy, right? You try super hard, you take your deductions on the phone of what kind of commodity is this and what regions are they shipping out of and what's my value prop, because I got to make 89 more of these today. And it's just, hey, why don't you just act like you're speaking with your friend, try less hard, listen intently, and what happens is the less effort, the greater the results.
It's so amazing how that works and how true that is. My first sales job I ever had, it makes me think to these days at New Balance, and probably maybe sharing too much information here, but when this is the job that I had early college, was at New Balance selling shoes, and the way that we made our commissions was from selling the insoles and the orthotics. And so the days that the guys, myself included, and I don't drink anymore, but the days that everybody
Nice.
sold best were the days that they were hungover. And the reason why was because like you just didn't really give a shit that day as much. And you're just like, you should try this. You should try this. Hey, why don't you just go ahead and try this? And all of a sudden they love it and they buy it. And all of a sudden you've sold more.
Yeah.
And
And
that
it's
was it,
like,
right? Because you're
what
just too
about
much
this?
in your head.
What about this one? No, don't take that. That's shit. Okay. All right, cool. I'll buy the one
Yeah,
that you
they
tell me
trust
to
you.
buy then, Yeah, for sure. And I think a
Yeah,
lot of sales, from the cold calls to everything else, it is a game of opposites.
that's an interesting way to put it. I like that. I did listen to a little bit of the podcast that you had with Matt and Will, and one of the things that you brought up that I thought was interesting, because I listened to a couple sales trainers talk about this stuff, that is the opening line on cold calls.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ones that you brought up was, "How are you?"
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I wanted to ask about this one is because some of them will say it triggers sales resistance, so you shouldn't, because you should go against the grain and do what other salespeople don't do.
Sure.
You use it, and I will admit I use how are you. I don't
Hmm.
use it every single time, but it is something that I do utilize because I don't think it that matters as much. I think it really almost matters is your tone and what you say after.
Sure.
But you said something that was really interesting in using how are you, and I
Hmm.
want you to talk about why you use that.
Well, why do you use it?
The same reasons that you do.
Okay. So
And
it's a utility. It's
correct.
my how are you is not uh, you can put
I
this you could
I'm
put this
using
on
it to,
the you could put this on the internet all you want. My how are you is not because I give a shit how you're doing. I don't really care how you're doing, to be honest. You're my 90th call of the day. I don't really care how anybody's doing except for the beer in my refrigerator. Um, I'm asking how are you because right now what I have on you, what I've deduced from preparing myself for this call is the business value that I'm going to bring to you. When you
mhm,
respond to how are you, then I'm going to figure out how to read what you're doing and establish
correct.
that personal connection. If I say how are you and you say good,
Good.
that doesn't mean you're doing good, but that's okay because you've told me all I need to know. So now
Yeah.
I'm wrapping up that business value in the approach that you have dictated to me is how you want to play this thing. And it's going to go much better because you want to know what doesn't work in that situation? A sales script. If
Thousand
somebody,
percent. Because as soon as you hear that good, papers are ruffling.
for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
And how are you is nothing but a utility. It's for you to tell me exactly how I need to proceed on this.
Right. Yeah, because you can get a gauge, right? You can get a gauge if they sound busy or obviously sound interrupted, and or if again there are some people that say, "Man, I'm doing great,"
For sure.
like about to leave, everything's great, and then all of a sudden, cool, you've got this whole open conversation. Your tone can be a lot different. Um, yeah, I've always thought people put too much emphasis, in my opinion, on just the opening line. I, of course, the opening line matters, but I really think it always obviously depends on your whole purpose of why you're calling and how you're actually explaining that
For
more than
sure.
anything else.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
100%. And I think we listen back to successful cold calls. Um, and it's just this, man, it's this difference between the expectation of what a business to business transaction looks like and how it
hmm
actually works and plays out. These successful cold calls, the lead ins, if you showed them to somebody who claims to be a sales guru and trains online courses about how you develop a script, they would cringe, they would hate it. But you know what? It works because it's human connection and it's informal and it's rough around the edges and it ain't pretty, but it gets the job done and it's been pretty effective for us.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's always funny watching those too because I'll see some of them. I'm like, oh, that stuff's pretty good. And you go to the comments and people always be like, oh, that would never work on me. And it's just, look, that's okay, right? The reality is like the majority of it probably actually won't work.
Right.
But you're trying to increase that to an extra 1% conversion, an extra 2% conversion, and that's the difference.
For sure.
Is what it will it work in a slightly higher converted rate? You're not going for 100 for 100 or even 95 for 100 because it's cold calling.
For sure. For sure. And it gets down to like what like a full sales cycle in freight is it's not a one call thing because it goes back to the no customers. I don't want the customers who are setting me up on the first call.
So that's what I want to ask next. I got a few questions because I know we're getting towards the latter half of the hour here.
I got all
What
day.
is what is one of the more memorable sales that you have and the timing that it took to get it?
Uh, ooh, that's a good question. So two come to mind off the bat. One is a government entity and had to do a bunch of bureaucratic paperwork on the back end and go out to DC to bring it back, and then actually wound up getting taken under the wing of one of the tenured logistics personnel out there. So that was actually pretty revealing. It was fun. It was something. I was young, so it was something that seemed way above my pay grade or way above my capability. So that was just a win that says you can, you know, nothing is too big. You're a grown man and you can go tackle pretty much whatever you want. Nothing is off limits. Um, the other was, I think it was like 4 years of following up, 4 handwritten poems, a
Four
ton,
years.
a ton of emails, a ton of calls, and then I just begged to get out of the doghouse. And I guess the doghouse line really hit one day, and I got tendered over a bunch of loads. And
Let's go.
yeah, but again, we're on we're on the SMB side of things in the mid market, so there's not a ton of like grinding for lanes and like wine and dining these directors for providing capacity on X lane or that lane. It's mostly these like
Yep.
quirky, like funny. We do the whole thing where we send out packages that have little. I don't think I have any in here. Let me look. Oh, I do.
It's more of the situation where when you're calling them, you're talking to that person.
These things we send these out in packages and say, hey, just trying to get my foot in the door. Um, and we also have little
For anybody that couldn't see, that's a little finger foot
yeah, it's
thing.
a little finger foot. And we also have little hats that we put our names on to get our name in the hat. So it's just quirky stuff like that. And again, it's SMB sales, man. You got to have fun with it. Some of the
Yeah,
mid-market customers, longer sales cycle, a little more transactional, but yeah,
that's cool. That's memorable stuff,
for sure.
clearly. Yeah, and it'll make you laugh. Um, I guess shifting to the sales and management side, and you're now overseeing a pretty decent sized team now at this point. What's your take on KPIs? What KPIs do you care about?
Yeah, so that's like the question that a lot of people. It's funny. I've gone to conferences and seeing panel speakers who have titles that are like crazy. And again, it's this developed apprehension that I guess I've had since I was a kid of like, that's above my span or like that's out of my spectrum of like understanding. Get on panels and Q&A comes up and everybody's like, what about KPIs? And they're all like, I don't know. We still don't know. It's hard, right?
Yeah.
Um, so that was actually something that took us a very long time. I don't think we have it perfected. Obviously, you want production, you want margin, you want clean margin percentages, you want on-time deliveries, you want, carrier repetition, you want all of that. On a day by day, quarterly is easy, right? Did you hit your production or did you hit your outreach? Day by day, what we've done for the cradle to grave side is so we've essentially split it up on you have what do we consider one full day of outreach, right? How many calls is that in a day based on your tenure? And, we've got 5 or 6 phases that we put individuals in. Then over here, we've got production wise, what is a full day's work? Is that booking X amount of loads or is that booking X amount of margin or is that, filling out an RFP or whatever? So we take production, we take outreach, and we take the percentages of both, right? We add those percentages together. If it gets to 100, we're satisfied with a full day's work. Now we've eliminated some KPIs out of there. So that's to say, if your job is to book 2,000 in profit margin a day, right?
Hmm.
Or to bust out 40 calls in a day, and you hit $1,000 in margin, and you bust out your 20 calls, you got 50% of each, that equals 100. We'll take that as a full day's work. And that's just the day-by-day management. We've had to add stuff in. If you're doing an RFP, you're exempt, right? If you're going to visit a prospect, you're exempt. If you're doing this, you're exempt,
Interesting.
obviously. But we've also had to take stuff out. You make quoting a part of a KPI for spot quotes. There's a lot of quoting and not a lot of calling that happens.
Yeah.
So we've had to remove that, and that's a tough one too, right? Because there are some times where it's, hey, dude, I've been grinding these email quotes and these text message quotes all day.
Hmm.
I can't do my outreach, and we will make exceptions to those rules, but ultimately quoting doesn't produce until it produces, and it doesn't, given the tech now, it does not take very long to quote shipments, to bid on shipments.
And I probably should have asked this too at the start, just for the audience to know, because I do know, and I meant to ask it at the beginning. But model wise, you guys are the split model, correct? What does that look like?
Yeah, we've got split. So one side of the office is account managers who have support teams underneath them. The other side is cradle to grave.
Okay, so a little bit of both.
Yep. Yep. Our mid-market and kind of volume accounts will go over to the AMs with the support staff, and then sales reps and maybe the SMBs with lower volume are going to stay over on cradle to grave.
Gotcha. Have to ask, what factor does CRM play for your team?
Oh, dude, it's a game changer. Especially Sales Dash, and that's not just because you're sitting here. I mean, it's everything, right? It is. I just did our training manual or our sales playbook slides for Sales Dash actually 2 days ago, yesterday. It organizes, it helps, it schedules, and organization is everything because it is 5% of the effort. But if you don't do it, you're wiping out the other 95% of the effort. I pulled one of our guys in here the other day, and I was listening to calls from September, and he just had this absolute banger of a call with a shipper. And she was like, we're starting, we've got imports coming in 2 weeks. We're an international energy company, hit me back in 2 weeks and let's get after it. Now, this is before we got on Sales Dash, and I looked and there was no activity between then and now. And it's just, that's on us. I can own that because they didn't have the resources they needed, right? I am 100% okay eating that. But it makes me want to, shake somebody or shake something, right? And fortunately, it was super well received. We reached back out. Hey, sorry about that. Totally unacceptable on our end. And again, I will hold that because they didn't have the resources that they needed to really get after it. But it won't happen again, right? And that was proven. And we're stressing the importance of, look, salespeople aren't notoriously organized. Salespeople aren't good schedulers. I'm not either, right? So I have no option but to centralize, and that's really helped us. And from a management standpoint, that pipeline strategization that we can do with that is massive. So we can place different commodities at a different regions, timed up and synced in with what the expected sales cycle is and allocate those correctly. And we've actually started to see it do some pretty cool stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of like tying up some of this stuff, I am curious with the experience of what you have and being able to, grow a team to 50. And I definitely think with the training program that you guys have in place, you guys are going to go well beyond that. Let's just say you were going back to the beginning, when COVID popped off, or, 2019, whenever it may have been. What are some of the things that you may have done a little bit, like one or two things that you may have done a little bit differently, especially sales wise? I'd be really curious to know about that you think may, and of course, like you're still in a really great spot within a pretty short period of time here. But what are some things that you're like, hey, I wish I would have done that a little bit differently in the earlier, maybe year one?
Not totally related to sales, but delegation.
Delegation. Okay.
I'm a control freak. Delegating out early and trusting the process, definitely.
What was the hardest thing for you to delegate?
Everything. That's tough. General oversight, like general day-to-day management, because I like being on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll answer all the questions, and it's not the Logan show, right? That's the whole point of all of this is people learn different things their way, and my way isn't the best to teach every single person. I get to do that in training. So like after that stops, let that tribal knowledge just spread, right? On the sales side, things I wish I had done earlier. It's hard to say increase training because it's like anything. We learn training as we train and what we don't think we're training and providing resources enough for, and then we try to correct that very quickly. Probably train on the enterprise shippers or try to tap into that market a little bit more, but Can you give me like a specific example of your question so I can maybe better answer it? There's a ton of stuff we wish we would have done differently. Hindsight's always
Yeah.
2020.
No, I was just kind of curious if anything would pop up. I mean, I think with what you're saying on the training piece, you learn that stuff organically through going through those classes and then
Sure.
obviously figuring out, hey, like this is the criteria. I mean, I'd be even curious, do you feel like you implemented the training program that you have fast enough?
I don't think I'll ever feel like we've trained enough. And sometimes because you ask any hiring class that's come through here and they go up to the class that just came in, and they're like, you have no idea how much better you have it than we did. Right. And that's cool to see,
Yeah, I
right?
bet.
Because it means
Yeah,
that we're working and we're training, and our training room is kind of by the big room where our cradle to
correct.
graves are at. And they'll pop their heads in and be like, wow, I didn't know that. And that's really rewarding to me. So I would, I would say I wish I had made like A+ training manual out the jump, but I don't think that would have necessarily been possible. Um,
All right, so I
yeah,
got another question then. Just to not to go training super heavy here, but it's interesting. I so like my sales career where I really polished my skills was at Tesla in the
right,
earlier days as a sales rep. They were very good with their learning and development team. They had an LMS, a learning management system, and not only was it just the onboarding and everything that was good, but it was the continuous training.
sure.
And that I feel like is really
Oh
difficult in
yeah.
brokerage. So what does that look like for you guys?
That's my favorite part.
Really?
That is where the light bulbs come on. The light bulbs come on in the continued training. So we'll do a training at 60 days, and this is sales specific. Ops is, you know, we can train on ops, but tech's pretty good. Trucks
Yeah.
are going to go to the address that you type in for the most part, and
Yeah.
then you're going to track them and make sure they do. So what we see is first 30 to 60 days, first 30 days on the phone is the way we see it is getting the shakes out. I don't expect you to produce anything in 30 days. But after 30 days, I'm going to come back and we're going to listen to a ton of your phone calls. And we're
Hmm.
going to say, here are your habits. Here's what you're doing wrong. I'm going to get a whiteboard and I am going to sit there with you and I'm going to draw a time line and we're going to listen and draw along with your momentum. Where is it going? Why is it going there? What's killing it? Again, 99% of the time, it's, hey, you need to be less formal. Okay, cool. So on the first 30 days, we have everybody on almost explicitly cold calls because it is a numbers game. After that 30 days, we start to pinch in these small amount of the follow-ups, right? Now, of course, there's exceptions to that, but through 30 days, we're saying, what are your habits? You know, what are your tendencies? How do we fix those? Here's why they're bad. And it's very, very, very eye-opening for reps to hear themselves on the phone, to put headphones on and listen with
Oh
me
yeah.
and say, this is what you sound like on the phone. And you think that what matters is what you're saying, but that's not what matters. It's what the other person is hearing, right? So to put
Hmm.
those headphones on and actually listen, faces
It's
get
cringy at first.
faces get so red, man. It's awesome. Um, but but
That's
then
so funny.
but then 60 days, what we do, and another big thing that we have on that 30 days is phone's starting to get heavy. You're not seeing results. You're not being intentional. And when I say not being intentional, you're making these calls and you are saying the same lead in with the same pitch and the same thing every single time. We have 12 call commandments here. One of them is when you get comfortable with your script, kill it, right? When you think you know your lead in,
Interesting.
kill it. Because it just breeds that inauthenticity. If you say the same thing 100 times a day and you call me and say it, I know that that's not the first time you said it that day. So day 60, we get back into the follow-ups. And then what we do is we deduce how are we leveraging information from past conversations into these calls. Because as a salesperson, and you seem like kind of a natural salesperson to me, it's obvious that I'm going to call back information that we spoke about last time, right? It turns out it's not that obvious for everybody, so we have to put it on paper. We have to, and this isn't a dig at anybody, this is how I learned, but I have to put it in pictures. I have to say, this is what your cycle looks like, right? There's two different kinds of momentum that we train on. There is micro momentum, which is conversational momentum, which is how are we actually going to control the momentum of a conversation? Basic stuff. Don't ask yes or no questions. Ramp up potential momentum for them to pick up your talking points and give you more information. But then day 60, there's that pipeline momentum, and that's how are we leveraging call 1, call 2, call 3, packaging those up and utilizing the approach that we know is going to work to execute follow-up call number 4. Because if I successfully leverage on my past calls, the effectiveness is going to compound, right?
That's gold. And I honestly think a lot that is going to go in one year out the other year for a lot of people. But I think that part right there is so key because
Sure.
people do not leverage that information that they do get from calls 1 and 2, right?
For
Or
sure.
the time that they spent to do the research, to go to the website to check stuff out. All that stuff eventually just gets lost. That in particular right there is a massive reason I am a big fan of CRMs, because it helps me
Sure.
recollect all of that information and know, okay, great, I remember now who this is and I can progress the sale effectively.
For sure. And it's building, and the way that we train on sales, like the biggest thing is that we sell a service. Okay. Services, and a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this. I don't care. It's how we train people. Services are harder to sell than products are. Okay. So
Agreed.
so our main goal, and this can take one call with good conversational momentum, it can take 50 follow-ups. But eventually, if we're asking the right questions, we are specifying our service, which in its most general form is point A to point B, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are specifying that down into a specific product, and we're going to sell it. So we're selling point A to point B, and on the first call I get, we move flatbeds sometimes, but I got to go kick rocks. Okay, cool. So next time I'm calling back, hey, I've got some flatbeds. You're in Sylacauga. Are you moving out of that area? Yeah, we do, but I got to kick rocks. Okay, cool. And this isn't
2 pieces of
obviously how it
information.
goes every time. Next, hey, I see you guys are moving cold press bar. Are you guys tarping that? Yeah, kick rocks. Got to go. Next time, hey, I spoke with you a few times. I know that the next thing you tell me is kick rock. So will you at least tell me if you tarp your loads? Yeah, we use tarps. Okay, cool. Next call. Where's the last place you shipped? We ship to Dallas once a month. We ship from Dallas once a month. It's where our coils come from. Boom, call. First of the month, I'm calling. I've got a truck in Midlothian. He's a flatbed. He's 48 feet, 102 wide. He's got tarps. He's got the coil racks. What day of this month are you sending, a PO out to get your coils brought in? So we've effectively taken, and it's not like that every time, right? That is
No.
But we've taken point A to point B, because I can't call and say, hey, do you want to buy transportation? That's not business value for anybody. You have to specify down. I've taken that and I have now turned it from a service into a product, because now I'm just selling him a flatbed one day this month with tarps from Dallas, Texas, back to Sylacauga, Alabama. So that is
And you know he needs it.
And I know that he needs it because he's
It
told
just took
me.
6 calls.
Exactly. And he's told me that he needs it. So I'm leveraging that. And our biggest thing is it is harder to sell a service than it is to sell a product. So we're going to ask questions until we specify down the service that we are selling into a very detailed product for a shipper.
That's so interesting that you say that too, because one thing that, especially with my last team in brokerage, we'd have some reps sometimes that would say, you ask them about like why they quoted a specific amount, and they say, oh, well, I added that because of the service. And then you ask them, well, like, what does the service mean? And they have a hard time unpacking that, right? Like what that actually means. And one of the things that I used to always try to say is like, look, it's easy to say that we're doing that, but we have to be able to effectively tell people how you're going to service them, right? I think you brought this up at the very beginning of the conversation, telling some people, hey, you're going to be the most trustworthy broker, the most responsive, not going to miss a pickup. I mean, man, everybody's pitching that.
Yeah, I think that was on the Two Dogs podcast for sure. But yeah, it's not about what you say, and it's not even necessarily about how you say it, right? It's about people take pride in their human skills, right? If I am speaking with you and I just met you, I'm taking pride and I feel confident in the deductions that I am making from the things that you don't say. I'm judging you, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
take pride in my gut. So what we're doing is we're actually trying to manipulate that and say, let's do some quick research. Okay. I know what commodity they move, so I can pretty much deduce what kind of equipment they're going to need. I know where they're based out of, so I know what markets they're shipping out of. I happen to know with that commodity, there's these accessorials. So I'm calling in and I'm giving that on the lead in. And great, I'm offering them a service, but on their end, they are taking the time to deduce and judge me. And my goal is to make that judgment that I'm somebody who's trustworthy, experienced, and knows what I'm doing. Right. And if I can do that in a relaxed, informal tone, I'm also going to be easy to deal with. And I think that's where you really, once you figure out that it's not what you say, it's not how you say it, but it's about what they're hearing and what they're putting together in their own head, then you can find some pretty good success no matter what market you're calling.
Well said.
Thanks.
Seriously. Yeah, well said. I haven't really heard it, because there will be those people that say it's not about what you say, it's how you say it.
Sure.
But that's it. I think what you're saying is the deeper level, because at the end of the day, you're communicating to somebody, and ultimately, it is how they're interpreting it.
For sure. For sure. And it's the conclusions that they're ultimately drawing about you, right?
Right.
It's you're not what you say, you're what they hear and what they think. So make sure that you're setting yourself up to be thought of in a good way.
Fantastic stuff. All right. Well, we are slightly. This is worth going overtime.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
thought that was a really enjoyable conversation. I think we'll have a part two of this. I would bet.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep. Well, we're obviously gonna have more conversations. We're gonna get to the golf course. Go ahead and let the people know what's your handicap. We need to know.
I'm crawling back down to a 4. I'm at a 6 right now. I took a lesson. It
All right.
completely ruined me.
You'll probably, I think 4 or 3 is gonna be in the sights here pretty soon.
It
So
better be,
we'll see.
man. It better be. I'm getting
Yeah,
I'm getting
I'm trying to break 10. I'm trying to get below 10 this year. That's the goal.
single digits just so hard, man, cuz mid to high single digits, I'm liable to go out there and fire off at 76. I'm also liable to go out there and fire off at 91. So it's a
It's
tough
just the
place to
game.
be. It's been a real struggle.
Yeah, it's the game. Well, we'll see how it goes Saturday.
For sure. I am super pumped on that.
Now, Logan, this has been a good conversation, man. Again, we've got Logan Dyer here, co-founder, managing partner over at Blackbox Logistics in Birmingham. If somebody was to listen to this and they're interested potentially in working with you guys, where can they find you guys?
Yeah, careers at shipblbx.com. Drop a resume, fill out the information packet, and we'll get back with you.
Go get some of the best training in the industry. Why not? Go
Come
see
on.
Blackbox.
Yeah, we'll get you good at golf
Good
too,
deal.
maybe.
Hell yeah. Logan, I appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
Likewise, man. You too.
Cheers.